Okay, well. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming out on this Saturday morning. And I'm delighted to be able to present to you the first time in about 50 years the double Dominics. In the late 1970s, when I was at UIC doing the Italians in Chicago project, that's where we got all these oral histories and a lot of the photos and also the exhibit upstairs. There was another project going on, and it was called the History Fair Project. You might have heard of it. Dominic and I were invited to do presentations to a group that was organizing the History Fair, and we were billed as the Double Dominics. That's the last time the Double Dominics appeared until now. At that time, I was the senior Dominic, not because of age, but because I was visiting assistant professor, and just a little bit below me was graduate student Dominic. And Dominic, now the tables are turned. Dominic is the historian of Chicago, the living historian of Chicago, the dean of Chicago history at the current time, and I am who I am. And you know that more than anybody else. But we've always been very good friends. Dominic, I don't know if I influenced him on this, but he ended up marrying a Sicilian from Brooklyn. And so we have to give him a lot of points for that. And you can see him anytime you want on WTTW. You have to have the passport. You can see him. And within 30 seconds, you can bring Dominic to your screen. So that's really important. But today we have him in person, and I'm really proud and pleased to present Dominic Pacyga.
Thank you. I'm not Italian, okay, but I do have a Sicilian wife, an Italian wife. And I must say that he's the one who should be giving this lecture, not me. He knows a lot more about this topic than I do.
This is a test.
It's a test, okay. My professor is giving me the test, yeah. But since he brought up my wife, she's from a little part of Sicily called Brooklyn. And when we got engaged, I called her parents to ask for her hand. You know, I thought this was the proper thing to do. So I called her father, and his name was Carmine, and Carmelo. And he said, oh, sure, you could get her, marry her. And then the mother came on and she said, oh, thank God, Dominic. I always thought she'd marry somebody who wasn't Italian. My first name, right? My whole name is Dominic Anthony Joseph. Okay. So, my mother had a sense of humor. She wanted to see if I could beat up in the neighborhood, you know. But anyway, so I talked to the mother, and she said, oh, thank God you're Italian. I was so happy that she's marrying an Italian boy. And I said, Mrs. Alemo, I'm not Italian. Silence. Silence for a few seconds. I was like, oh God, she's going to tell me I can't marry her daughter. She says, you're Catholic, right? Yes, I'm Catholic. She says, okay. Anyway, all right, how about the first chief? Thank you. So I'm going to be talking primarily about the Italian peasant migration in the late 19th century, early 20th century. In the 1850s, there was a small, well, let's go to the next one, I think, yeah? Okay, so this is the parts of Italy, you can't see it on there too well, but you can see the change. So in this slide, it goes from 1876 to 1900. This is 1901 to 1915. If you look at the numbers, you can see that the first numbers, the earliest numbers, are from the north, okay? In fact, the first settlers in Chicago are from Liguria, which is in the northwest coast, right? Genoa. Yeah. So they're Genovese. And so they come from there originally. It's a small number in the 1850s. Mostly they are artisans. Many of them were merchants, vendors, barbers, and other artisans. It's a small group. By 1880, there's 1,300 Italians in Chicago. So it's still growing slowly, okay? These early immigrants were primarily, as I said, from Liguria. In 1866, they organized a mutual aid society. I'm going to help with this. Società de Unione di Fratellanza, okay, a mutual group. And they've owned the first newspaper, Unione Italiana.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's a very short-lived newspaper, but it's the first one, 1867, 1869. Many of these were veterans of the Risorgimento, okay, and they were very nationalistic in their feeling. And they organized the first Columbus Day parade in 1868. 1868, a long time ago, okay? Okay, so these, so mostly they're coming from the north. So right from the beginning, like in most ethnic groups, there's a division from regions, right? People from the north, people from the Mezzogiorno. Huh? So my wife is from the Mezzogiorno, okay? Yeah. And the northern Italians and the southern Italians sometimes don't always get along. Okay, this happens in almost every ethnic group. In fact, it happens in every ethnic group in Chicago. Okay, later the migration is, as I said, from the south, especially Basilicata, Campania, and Sicily. You can't see it from here, but these numbers are just to show you the national numbers, and the numbers really begin to jump after 1890. Here, let's see, 1890 it says 52,000 immigrants to the United States. By 1906, it's 273,120 immigrants to the United States from Italy in 1 year. So the numbers are really picking up. People are coming, large numbers, okay? Okay. Italians in Chicago, these are rounded off numbers. So 1850s, small numbers. By 1880, 1,700. By 1900, 16,000 Chicago Italians. By 1930, 74,000 Chicago Italian immigrants and their children. By 1970, 202,400 immigrants and their children in the city of Chicago from Italy. By the year 2000, in the whole area, roughly, because now you've got a lot of suburban, but it's about 500,000 Italians in the Chicago area, people who claim Italian ancestry. Today it's about 580,000 Italians. So it's a big group. It's a big group. It's not the biggest group, right? But it's a big group and a powerful group. So getting to the Italian port. If you lived in the interior of the country, how do you get to the ports of Italy? By train, or you walk, okay? Maybe by cart. People are sometimes on carts, especially in Sicily, going to Messina or to Palermo, okay? Go ahead. The trip is very interesting. It takes about 10 days, about 10 days on the boat. Many of these people, even though Italy is right on the sea, many of these people have never been on the sea, right? And so you're on a boat, and the boat is rocking, and you're getting seasick. And people will call back and say, bring your own food, because the food on the boat's not that good. So bring your real sausage from Calabria, bring your real sausage from Basilicata, bring the real food. Yes?
Is there, I don't know if you have a microphone or.
I don't have a microphone. There's no.
People that can't hear
I'll
you.
try to talk louder.
Thank you, sorry.
I'll try to talk louder. Maybe I'll move a little closer. Okay, yeah.
It's the only one that couldn't.
Can you hear me now? I'll try to. It's been a while since I retired from teaching 7 years ago, so my teacher's voice is a little way behind me. Okay. Okay. So the trip. So people are on the boat. It's swaying. It's swaying. People are getting a little seasick. Go ahead. And then they see it, right? The Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. And Ellis Island, after 1890, is a major port for all immigrants from Europe into this country. Ellis Island. Ellis Island's a scary place. You don't speak English. In fact, some of people speak a dialect that a lot of other Italians don't understand, right? And, go ahead. And suddenly they're thrown into this. Has anybody been to Ellis Island? It's quite an interesting place. They've cleaned it up a lot, and they fixed it up, and you can see. But they're coming on ferries. So before the ship, comes into New York, they unload third-class passengers on ferries, and the third-class passengers go to Ellis Island. The first-class, the opera star Duzay, so forth, right? They land at the dock in New York. They don't go through Ellis Island. But the third class, which is most of the immigrants, right, coming on ferries to Ellis Island. Then they're waiting up here for an examination. Now the examination, most people wore dark clothes. So when you walked into Ellis Island, if you looked like you had a bit of a limp, they took a piece of chalk, they marked an X over your back hip. If it looked like your hand was a little strange, they marked it here. They peeled back your eyelids because they felt that they could get recognize disease in the eyes, okay? And if you coughed, oh boy, then you went up the stairway of tears because you might have tuberculosis, right? And you had to be checked out. If you were a little sick, they kept you there. There was a hospital, they kept you, or they sent you back. Think about being sent back. Think about a whole family coming, and the daughter has a cough, and they find out she has TB. She's got to go back.
Oh, my.
Now, does the family go back? Or does the family go to New York or Chicago or where? Right? There's big decisions to be made. Oh, and they ask you these questions. Are you an anarchist? Are you a socialist? Are you a communist? Have you got 2 wives? And some people do, right? Okay. So, people are turned away. And then they get on a train and they go to this place called Chicago. So the immigrant trains are third-class trains. Third class. So when they're coming into Chicago, coming across New York, into Pennsylvania, towards Ohio, suddenly they stop. So your cousin Giuseppe, right? He's waiting for you at the train station. But there's a big run at the Chicago stockyards. 40,000 cattle are coming in. All those trains are blocked. They are second-class trains, so the third-class trains stop. Second class gets first run. So now you're stuck in Ohio till all those trains pass. So you pull into the train station in Chicago, 5 hours late. Your cousin went home. Now what? You don't speak English. Go ahead. It's a hell of a big city, all right? It's the fastest growing city in the world in the 19th century. In 1833, there's 400 people living in Chicago. By 1890, there's 1 million. Soon it grows to be 3 million, right? It's the fastest growing city in the world. And you don't know how to get to Taylor Street because your cousin was going to take you, right? Or to Ohio Street, or to what some people call Little Hell, other people call Little Sicily. Today it's Cabrini Green, right? So there you are. Now what? Well, various organizations, mutual aid organizations, would post people at these train stations to try to help them get on their way, show them how to get there. And so now you took the streetcar. So they came largely because the men were railroad workers originally. They were brought by the Padron system. Basically, men convinced other men to come, right, and work, and often exploited them. I always said, be careful of your own. They're the first one to rip you off, you know. And that's not only the Padron system, but in Polish and Irish and Lithuanian and every other ethnic group. Go ahead. Women, as they came, were drawn to the garment industry. Where was the garment industry? On the northwest, west, and close by on the southwest side. This employed 40,000 people by the end of the 20th century, by the end of the 19th century. So women worked in the garment factories, and here they're mixing with all other kinds of groups: Polish Jews, Polish Christians, Lithuanians, Germans, white Irish straw bosses, right? And they're working under very hard conditions. Many are working in sweatshops. Many are taking clothes home to work, and so the children are also sewing. Okay, so you've got some very difficult situation here in working class, in these working class lives. Go ahead. Churches are being organized. First, of course, is the Church of the Assumption. Have you been there?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful church. It's absolutely beautiful church. It's the first Italian church, 1881. And then Holy Guardian Angel Parish, which I'll have a lot to say about a little bit later.
Okay.
But by 1920, there are 18 Italian parishes in Chicago and the suburbs, even all the way out to Chicago Heights, where he's from. Okay, by 1920. Many of the men who work on these business as construction workers, railroad workers, Italians seem to prefer outside work. They begin to organize and establish businesses, small businesses in Italian districts. So you've got here a bicycle repair shop, a food store, and of course a saloon. Okay. The saloon. You know these pictures?
The middle picture is our grandmother.
The middle, that's your grandmother.
Third grade education,
Huh?
running the little grocery
Sure,
store.
third grade, and she ran it.
Is the tavern one for brothers?
Where was it?
The tavern on the west side,
On the west side, Taylor Street area?
Ladson, California.
Oh, okay, uh-huh.
Third
And that's
grade
a-
education.
And that's a saloon there, yeah.
Yeah, the Italians in Chicago project collected most of those pictures.
Right. You're gonna recognize a lot of this stuff I'm
Yeah,
showing.
okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
And this is Taylor Street. Taylor Street was the largest settlement, okay? But there were over 20 Italian neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. We're gonna look at some of the major ones, okay? But so Taylor Street was Little Italy, and of course this was on the west side, and it was affected by various institutions politically, reform. You have Hull House that comes in 1889. Ellen Gates Starr on your left, Jane Addams on the right. They founded Hull House, which was a very important place for the Taylor Street community. But you know, these people did not quite understand a lot of things. So they write about, well, you know, Ellen Gates Starr eventually converts to Catholicism and becomes a nun, which is really kind of interesting also. Her aunt became an important Catholic theologian. But Jane Addams had this feeling, you know. So she was from a upper middle class WASP family, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family. Her father had been, if it was put in a European context, almost a nobleman, right? He was a banker, he was a grain dealer, he had a lot of power. He tried to teach her that she had to help those who were suppressed, right, by the system. But of course, he was also part of the system. So, you know, well, both things are working on here. But Jane Addams never understood, I think, this is my personal feeling with a couple other people that I know, never quite understood the Italian community. Never quite understood the Catholic community. She just didn't get it. So she said there was no beauty in these neighborhoods. I guess she never went into a church, right? Because churches are places you can be quiet, right? You're in 4 rooms, 8 kids, and a husband. Where does a woman go? Church. She can go to confession every day just to get out of that house, right? Just to get out of that house every day if she needs to, right? And churches are beautiful places. The Holy Family on Roosevelt Road, right? And of course, Our Lady of Pompeii. Go ahead. This is a woman that I know very little about. Do you know more about her?
I do.
Okay, I know she was a popular midwife, and then and actually, where did she come from? I had it here someplace. She lived on 931 South State Street.
Migliano.
Okay, Migliano, and she was a popular, as I say, midwife, but also a political activist.
Yeah, we've covered her in the first women's book,
Okay.
and we headlined that a woman who really delivered her voters.
Oh, yeah.
And she was right up there with the, what's their names?
They all think they're comedians. They keep their day job.
Conklin and,
Bad House John Coughlin and Hinky Dink Kenna. She was a big supporter of First Ward Alderman
yeah.
and of Carter Harrison, the mayor.
And she had ambitions a little bit later, and she announced, I think, that she was gonna run for alderman, but a week or two later, there was no word from her, and there was nothing about her in any newspapers after that until she died in 1920, and they had a really big funeral.
Yeah.
And then all of the mayor and the governor all attended,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah, so there was a hint that she was gonna run for alderman. I know that she said, no, never again, I'm not interested, I'm supporting Hinky Dink and Bad House John Coughlin. And then she disappeared from the public eye. So, who knows, right? But she was really important because you've got Jane Addams here, gets a lot of the, she tried to work against the spread of cholera, which was very big in Chicago, cholera and all these kinds of diseases. So she was a very important woman. Okay.
Yeah, she's most politically powerful woman on the street level.
Mhm.
Then-
Well, women had gotten to vote in municipal elections in 1913. They don't get to vote for president until 1920, but in 1913 they get, and so she organizes.
Yeah,
this
she
one.
was one of the organizers.
Yeah. But here's the guy, Alderman John Powers, who the Italians called Johnny DePau. Okay, so Johnny DePau. Also, his other nickname was the Great Mourner. He actually held in his every day when he walked out, in his one hand, one pocket he had a rosary, the other pocket he had a skull cap for Jewish sinners. A lot of Jews in the ward. Oh, when he was first alderman, it was almost all Irish, Dutch, and Scandinavian. But then you people moved in, right? And they moved out, okay? And so suddenly he became Johnny DePau. But he kept control of the 19th ward for, 20, 30 years, something like that. He was the most powerful alderman. He would be the equivalent of Eddie Burke today, before he went to jail, right? So he was very, very powerful. He sat on all these big committees. And he was also, so here's a guy who owned a gambling house, also owned 2 saloons, never took a drink and didn't gamble. He said, people who drink and gamble are stupid. That's why they pay me, okay? And so he was very powerful in the community. Then in the early 1920s, his office got bombed. There were a couple of clashes that went on, and of course he finally went away. But he lived right across from the park there where the Columbus statue was.
Yeah.
Argo?
Yeah.
Peanut Park or
Yeah.
Arrigo Park.
Arrigo Park, yeah. Fraternal groups began to organize. The big one, of course, was the Sons of Italy, which now are the Sons and Daughters of Italy. They were founded in New York City in 1905, and then they came to Chicago in 1924. But that's not to diminish the fact that there's a whole bunch of mutual aid societies in the Italian community. What's a mutual aid society? Mutual aid societies where a bunch of people get together and they create sort of an insurance for each other, so that when one of them dies, the funeral will be paid for. These are very poor people. By the way, Johnny DePau, who was a mourner, had carried a skull cap and a rosary, depending on which funeral parlor or to which house he was going to for the wake. And he could say in various languages, "So sorry for your loss." So you could say it in Italian, you could say it in Yiddish, you could say it in various other languages. But he often also, before some of the mutual societies could help, he would also say, Mrs. Battaglia, I'm so sorry for your loss. This is going to cost you a great expense, and you got 6 children. I'll pay for the funeral. And he would pay for the funeral. So he was known in the neighborhood by everyday people as the good man, right? He handed out chickens, geese on Christmas trees, toys for the kids. What did he want?
Votes.
Vote. That's all he wants is your vote. Well, in Italy you didn't vote, right? What's a vote? Right? You vote for this guy. And by the way, in Chicago, you may not believe this, but you could vote sometimes even if you weren't a citizen, right? Because the precinct captain would say, Mrs., fill out these forms. Okay, Mr., fill out these forms, I'll take care of it. And the judge would say, you're a citizen. Okay. So it was a very different kind of, So there is, there's even in our recent election, right, or coming election, there's a set of aftertaste of this. People bring these things, it's impossible today. But then it was very, very possible still in places like Chicago, New York. In fact, in New York, they would greet immigrants at Ellis Island as they came off of Ellis Island on the ferries and hand out immigration papers, citizenship papers, just sign here. Right? That's Tammany Hall.
Yeah, my grandfather came in 1900, and in 1905, he got his citizenship.
1905, right?
Yeah. And it was obviously a local situation. His name was Gianetti. They spelled it on the document, Jeanette. The girl's name. Oh, who's that?
Well, you can't talk about Chicago, even if you're not talking about Italians, without mentioning Al Capone. Right? I did a book called Chicago Biography. The publisher said, you got to put a picture of Capone in it. Okay, so I did. But the stereotype of Italians, especially from the South, right, was that they were gangsters, was mafia, the Black Hand, various. This became a terrible stereotype that was prejudicial against most Italians, right, through this whole time period. Capone, of course, underlines that, right, because he comes around at that time. He's from Brooklyn. He's not related to my wife. He's from Brooklyn, and so I went to the New York City Police Museum. They have a huge exhibit on Capone, and the exhibit's all about his life in New York and in Brooklyn. And at the very end, there's a little card that says, and then he moved to Chicago. Talk about Second City, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Century of Progress World's Fair. This is a big thing for the Italian community because, of course, Balboa. As all Balboa comes, there's this plane landing, seaplane landing on Lake Michigan, and the whole celebration of with the Italian building. The Century of Progress was the second World's Fair in Chicago. The first one was the Columbian Exposition. Italians took part in that, of course, because of Columbus, right? And was very much an expression of Italian pride. So when you think about ethnic groups, you have to think about what they unite around, what symbols they unite around. Italians don't. Several people have said Balboa Street should be changed to Fermi, right? There's a little street downtown called Balboa. Okay. Several people have said change it because he was a fascist. He was a supporter of Mussolini. Okay, until they turned on each other. But, Fermi, change it to Enrico Fermi Street. But Fermi was never part of the Italian community. He stayed in Hyde Park. He was a nuclear physicist. He was an elite. He didn't go to Taylor Street. I'll bet he didn't eat pasta. So he was very, very not part of the community, never fully accepted by the community in that way. Let's look at some Italian neighborhoods. Go ahead. This is from Dominic's book. These are the major Italian neighborhoods across the city of Chicago. So you can see Italians are really spread out. They even go as far south as Chicago Heights. Good God, right?
20% of the population in 1920 and more later.
In the Heights?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can see the big ones, of course, West Side, 24th and Oakley, and Bridgeport, 26th Street, but also up around Belmont, Cragen, etc., and Grand and Western. And of course, the Sicilian community where Cabrini Green on the near north side is now located. Go ahead. So when you look at neighborhoods, this is the way I look at neighborhoods. And during this period, when most people are traveling around by streetcar, okay? You need an economic symbolic base. Neighborhoods don't just appear. You need an economic symbolic base. Why does a neighborhood exist? So if it's the back of the yards, it's the stockyards. If it's the University of Chicago, it's Hyde Park, right? What is this community around? Well, Taylor Street is around railroads, right? And the garment industry and construction, okay? So you have this economic symbolic base which creates a neighborhood. Neighborhoods just don't pop up. They have to have a reason for being. I looked in the Bible, nowhere does it say that God on the 8th day said, let there be Bridgeport. It's just not there, okay? So then comes an institutional layer. What kind of institutions? There's formal institutions, and there's informal institutions. The formal institutions are the church, right? The fraternal group, those kinds of things. Maybe stores, delicatessens, etc. What are the informal ones? Well, a problem that all ethnic groups deal with, youth gangs, juvenile delinquents. They're important in these neighborhoods. They are in many ways the defenders of the neighborhood, the communal neighborhood. You go up next to the block. Let me just shut this off. Sorry, I should have shut this off before. The block, okay, the block is the most intense setting. And in the Italian community, people tend to settle by region. So if you're from one region, you settle with your other paesani, right? And if you're not, well, maybe you should still settle someplace else. And this is true, once again, with almost every ethnic group. And then finally, the family. When families feel insecure in neighborhoods, what do? They move. Yeah. And if they're not replaced by other families, then the neighborhood dissolves. So demographic change. You'll also notice I've got, say, it says Irish, Italians, Irish, Germans, because no neighborhood was totally Italian. No neighborhood was totally Polish. No neighborhood was totally Jewish. You lived on one house, maybe the next house over there was somebody Irish who stayed from behind, or maybe there was one Dutch lady. If you look at the Hull House maps, you can see it looks like a rainbow, right? Looks like a rainbow because of all these different ethnic groups. There are concentrations, but why do people say, oh no, the whole neighborhood was Italian? Because they only mixed with Italians, right? They went to Italian church, they ate at an Italian restaurant, they went to Italian delicatessen, the men went to an Italian bar, right? I thought I shut this off, I'm sorry. Now it's on silent. So you have to understand that Holy Family was originally an Irish church on Roosevelt Road. It was founded very early, 1856, I think, 1857, by St. Ignatius High School. All right? It survived the fire, because the fire was just to the west. Mrs. O'Leary was a parishioner there. And when the fire happened in 1871, they said, see what those damn Irish are doing. They're burning down the city, and they're looting, right? If the Italians had been living in that neighborhood in large numbers, they'd see what the damn Italians are doing, right? Yeah. So these immigrants were stereotyped constantly. So why is Mrs. O'Leary being blamed for the fire? Several reasons. She's a woman. She's Catholic. She's an immigrant. Oh my God, she's Irish, right? So it must have been her who set the fire. Of course she didn't. We know she was asleep when the fire broke out. And that fire transformed the city, of course. But some of those Irish are still in their neighborhood. Johnny DePaul is Irish, right? Some of his closest family members and supporters are Irish in the neighborhood that's Italian. There are Poles in the neighborhood, Czechs. The German church, St. Francis of Assisi, originally German, later became largely Mexican, Italian and Mexican, you know, and on Roosevelt Road. And St. Wenceslas, which was a Czech parish which became mostly Polish. There's a lot of mixture of people going on here. In the 19th ward, there were 21 one language is spoken. So we call this social integration, spatial segregation. I'm sorry, spatial integration, social segregation. Spatial integration, they live together. Socially, they stay away from each other. They go away to and God forbid you don't marry somebody from across the street, right? There's always that, my mother-in-law. At least I was Catholic. Okay, go ahead. Little Italy, Taylor Street. And I'm sure everybody's been to Mario's to have Italian lemonade. I know I go all the time. But Taylor Street became the largest settlement, okay? Go ahead. Our Lady of Pompeii, the shrine, which is the shrine. It was saved, basically, to become the shrine to the Italian people. And it was just a parish beforehand. My brother was married there, yeah. Go ahead. Now, this is the story of Florence Scala. Very important woman. Father Itala Scola, the pastor of Holy Guardian Angel Parish, challenged a plan to locate UIC on the west side. The church had already been raised. So this church had been raised for the construction of the Dan Ryan Expressway. They built a new church and a new school. And a few years later, the city said, you're going to have to knock it down again. Right. So there it goes. It's a brand new school, brand new church, but now you're going to have to knock it down again so that guys like I could go there to school, right? UIC. So it was rebuilt, but now it was knocked down. But it was to be raised for the new campus. He called a meeting on February 13th, 1961 to protest the decision, where he was joined by Reverends Raymond Bianchi and Joseph Gallego of St. Francis of Assisi, a largely Mexican parish at this point. Neighborhood women flocked to the meeting, and several of them asked Florence Scala, a young college-educated housewife from the neighborhood, to chair it. Scala was the daughter of Italian immigrants and had been involved in the Near West Side Planning Board and with the Hull House settlement. She quickly emerged as a neighborhood spokesperson and led a protest to City Hall the next day. Here she is at a sit-in in 62 outside of Mayor Daley's office, protesting the knocking down of the neighborhood, which was sometimes called the Valley, sometimes just called Little Italy, sometimes just called Taylor Street. Scala House, a week later, Scala's house was bombed. They bombed it. Nobody was hurt, the building wasn't destroyed. She would later open a restaurant in that building later on, but it was bombed. She ran for alderman in 1963, but was defeated. But she became this voice, this force. Her papers are at UIC right now, I think, yeah. And she became this force in the neighborhood, trying to organize against the machine, which decided, okay. So, and I've got a new book coming out next fall on politics, and I call this the battle between the sacred and the profane. The profane is big business downtown. Why does downtown want this campus there? Because racial change is happening, and they want to see this as a barrier to protect the loop, okay, from the West Side Black community. So you got to move, right? That's it. People are just forced out, okay, out of that community. Go ahead. And the campus that today serves 36,000 students, along with the medical center and the campus together, have reworked the entire West Side. Now, some families benefited quite a bit from this that stayed in the neighborhood. Their housing prices went up. They sold these old tenements. They were changed, turned around, restaurants, etc. Mario's is doing good business during the summer. The UIC students who buy Italian ice there. But many people were driven out, just driven out of the neighborhood. Right. Little Sicily, same thing happens. But this is for housing, public housing, that comes in originally, they were townhouses. They were originally townhouses, and they were occupied by both Italians and African Americans. And they were be working class housing for the industries on Goose Island, okay, and on the near north side. Then the high rises come in, and of course, today they're gone, okay. And now these people have been pushed out just almost completely from the neighborhood as well, because it's being gentrified, okay. And it's a big change, and you're seeing gentrification That's what happened after UIC came to Taylor Street, right? Gentrification. Gentrification is now spilled into where? Pilsen. As the university has moved south to the railroad tracks at 16th Street, taking over the old Jewish community known as Maxwell Street, right? Which was largely an African-American community by the time it was taken out, okay? And then beyond that is Pilsen, and students need a place to live, Pilsen, okay? Originally a lot cheaper, not so cheap anymore. My daughter lived in Pilsen for a little while, and what she paid for housing, I considered it a sin. And she lived in a building that had been a barn with a horse, and a wagon. They changed it into an apartment, and she lived there. And she was paying a tremendous amount. I thought she was paying a tremendous amount of money. Of course, I'm cheap. Okay. Highwood, Illinois, perhaps the most successful or upper middle class suburb with Italians dominate, I would think. Highwood is just north of the city. This book, Andrea Bernardi's Houses with Names, very heavily Italian in one part or another. Yeah. Go ahead.
They're mostly from Modena.
From Modena? Okay. This is North Harlem. It's just been named North Harlem, Little Italy a few years ago, I believe. Isn't the Italian American Sports Hall of Fame moving there?
Yes,
Yes.
slowly.
Yeah. I loved it on Taylor Street. We used to go and take the kids all the time, it was great. Of course, they had the Frank Sinatra Auditorium, who must have been a big sports guy. But the Joe DiMaggio statue across the street.
Oh, yeah, it was great setup.
Yeah, and it's all gone now. But now they're moving here, from what I understand.
It's in storage.
I don't know if they're bringing Joe DiMaggio with them.
Okay. That's Gino of Gino's Imports.
Yeah. So this is Columbus Day parades. How do you now you've become an ethnic group, because immigration has basically been stopped. I don't know. Have you been to Italy lately?
Yeah.
They're doing quite well.
No, we came 10 years ago.
From where?
No, we lived around the world, but
Oh.
we are originally from Naples.
Okay, from Naples.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been I took my mother-in-law, who accepted me, to Sicily. We went to Sicily, and she was startled when she met her cousins. They lived in this beautiful house overlooking the ocean. They're from Pate de Messina, which is just outside of Messina. They took us to Tindari to see the Virgin, and etc. And she said, we were sending them care packages. Now they live better than I do.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, well, that's good, right? She said, yeah, but we were sending them care packages. Yeah, that was 1946, 1947, calm down.
I remember those.
Oh yeah, we used to send them to Poland, of course, yeah. Okay, but this is the Columbus Day Parade in 2010. The first Columbus Day Parade was at 1868. Pacyga-Italians there, the picture of Casa Italia.
That is
language.
a rare, I'd like to find that sign again.
I'll send you the picture.
Okay.
Yeah, I took these photos with my daughter. And the old neighborhood Italian club is in Bridgeport, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I walked in there one day, because I nosed. I walked in, there's a couple of guys playing cards in the corner. They're kind of old. They go like this, not to me, I'm looking around. These two guys come up, and he's whispered, they walk over and say, what do you want? I said, I just want to see what this building was like. He says, you don't belong here, do you? I said, I was just, He said, get out. So, I know when to leave. But it's actually a very active association in Bridgeport of older Italians, I think. I don't know if there's
A
young
lot
boys.
of retired former city
Yes.
employees.
Yes. A lot of retired city employees.
Streets and sand.
Yeah, those kinds of things. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and this was, yeah. So this is the other way we celebrate. So I have a friend who looked at a lot of ethnic groups in the city of Chicago. He said ethnic groups tend to celebrate why? Over famous people, music, and food. Right? Okay, so San Rocco is a famous person, okay, and you have the Festa. And the Festas are all over the area. I always had I don't know if you know who Gary Wills is, but Gary Wills is a historian, and he just had moved to Chicago in the early 1980s, And he asked me to show him around, so I was taking him around. And we turned the corner in the bus, and in the car, and there was San Rocco coming at me with dollar bills, all over, And Gary says, "Geez, you really do know this city." It was a total mistake. I had no idea, but I had to get off the street right away because San Rocco was coming at me. People were saying, "Get out of here," But that comes out of St. Therese Chinese Catholic Mission. Has anybody been in that church? There's an Italian Mother of God, there's a Chinese Mother of God. And they're both staring down at you, And they both saying, "Hey, Polak, get out of here." No. This one is close to my house. I live in Beverly. St. Donatus Festa, the Blue Island, and Blue Island, Illinois, which it still is, I think, a pretty big thing. Yeah, in this area. Go ahead. And this is the Feast of San Rocco here at Pacyga-Italians in Stone Park, celebrated. Okay. So Little Italy remains the sort of, this Taylor Street remains sort of the symbolic center of the Italian community, even to this day, even though it is diminished. The Italian community is very small compared to what it once was, right? There aren't quite as many delicatessens, there aren't quite as, there's lots of restaurants because everybody loves Italian food. Somebody once asked me, I was giving a talk, and I mentioned that my wife was Italian. And a woman raised her hand. "Why do Poles and Italians marry so much? Intermarry so much?" And I says, "It's the food. They take a pierogi, they pour tomato sauce on it, and they call it ravioli. Come on, it's genius. Other than that, pierogi doesn't taste that good. But now you put tomato sauce on it, it's great. So my wife cooks Italian, and it's great. It's wonderful. And of course, go ahead. Since the bear has appeared on TV, right? Italian beef has become a national symbol of Italians. I don't know why, but okay. I like Italian beef. But it's Johnny's, right, in Wood Park. It was just voted #1 Italian beef by the Chicago Magazine.
It always is.
It always is, right. And then the second one was Al's. Now I prefer Al's because Elmwood Park's a long way from my house. Okay, but Al's is there. And of course, that's the one, Mr. Beef is the one that it's actually based on, I believe. At the bottom.
Well, yeah, that's the one they use.
And yeah, they use it, yeah.
The beef sandwich is important because of the peanut wedding.
Right.
Yeah.
In the 1930s, upscale weddings were no longer possible. So in Chicago itself, they developed the peanut wedding. And a peanut wedding, what's on the menu?
Peanuts and Italian beef.
Peanuts, Italian beef, and beer. And you could, if you wrap up the Italian beef, you can throw them like footballs in a crowded hall. So that happens sometimes. And upstairs in the exhibit, we have a peanut sack that somebody saved from their wedding as one of the souvenirs of the wedding. And it's a great, in the 1970s with the Italians in Chicago project, we did what was supposed to be a fundraiser at Navy Pier that was a mock peanut wedding. And my students dressed up like members of the wedding party, and they had a great time. The fundraising didn't really take place.
Well, like I say, I always preferred Al's. When Al's was on TV one day saying how to eat. You hold it here and you bend over like this because of the juice gets all over you other than that. I never quite, I usually come home with a stained shirt. Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask questions
Sure.
now or later, but I wonder if you or Dominic ever researched or read about how these Italian-American foods were developed. I'm from Italy, I've never heard of Italian beef.
Yeah, nobody in New York has either.
No, it's not, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's an Italian-American thing.
Just up the heroes,
How
right?
these things developed.
Yeah.
You know how they emerged?
Well, I think during the Depression, pretty much, right? The
Yeah,
Italian beef.
and it was cut really thin.
Yeah,
And, Al's cuts it as, I think you can see through it.
yeah.
But it probably tastes better that way with all the Jews. So
Yeah.
it's
But my wife, who grew up in an Italian community in Brooklyn,
yeah.
said, "Italian beef, what's that?" She had no idea what an Italian beef sandwich was. You know.
If I may, another question?
Sure.
You asked a question before I'm interested in.
Mhm.
When do these immigrants become an ethnic group? And I have
Okay, I should
I have
have.
a- I have an addition to that question, and that is, when do they become American?
Yeah. The 1920, World War I is a big breaking point for these people. It's a big change. Why? Immigration's cut off. You know, Italy in World War I is an ally of France and Britain. And but because of the war, immigration is basically cut off. After the war, Congress passes laws. There was a great deal of prejudice against immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. There was a feeling among the ruling elite in this country that they could never be Americans. How could they be Americans? Look at those names. I can't even pronounce them. You know, look at this, Kostankovsky. How do you even spell that? Battaglia. How come there's two T's, right? I mean, it's just, and they speak these strange languages. They don't speak English. They don't speak French, right? They speak Italian, or they speak Greek, or they speak Bulgarian, or Yiddish, you know. So they're never going to fit in. So they passed a law that cut back on immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe primarily, while opening up immigration from Northern and Western Europe. Think about how that fits in today's arguments about immigration, right? You got the good ones, Northern and Western Europe. You got the bad ones, Southern and Eastern Europe, right? They're never going to fit in. Never. Of course, that's crazy, right? You look pretty American to me, right? You speak English pretty well, even maybe with a little bit of an accent, okay? Of course you could become American. It takes time. So in 1924-25, Congress passes laws which close down the entrance of immigrants. If we went back to that slide with the numbers, you can see how to drop in Italian immigration from 200,000 to 15,000, 16,000. Okay, people are still coming, but they're now on a quota system. They can't come in the large numbers they once did.
My father came anyway.
And Mike, well, we were talking earlier how your father was what? Your father came in as an illegal immigrant? No, that was your.
Yeah, my father came in as illegal.
Yeah.
He came twice, as a matter of fact, from Cuba to New Orleans. The first time they caught him and sent him back. A couple weeks later, he came on the same ship, and they didn't catch him.
My grandfather stowed away on a ship and snuck into Ellis Island, and his brother came with my grandfather's passport. So it says on the boat that when you go to Ellis Island, it says my grandfather came in that boat. Of course, that was his brother. He snuck in, and you know, his brother was afraid to try to sneak in, so they gave him his passport. He was the only one who had a passport, and they snuck in. So there's always been, or across from Canada. You go up to Canada, you just walk across the border. But let me finish. I'll tell them. So the ethnic group, then, it begins to change because immigration is cut off. They become more Americanized, okay? And one of the things that's great about Italian culture in the United States is, what's the capital of Italian Americans? New York, right? So you were close to the entertainment industry of the world. So suddenly, think about it. Sinatra, Tony Prima, all these great singers, Dean Martin, right? They're all in New York. And so they all get national and international attention. And so the Italian culture was, I have a whole bunch of Tony Prima records at home, right? If I had my computer here, I could play them for you, okay? You know Tony Prima. So,
Louis Prima.
oh, Louis Prima. I'm sorry, Louis Prima, yeah.
Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett, yeah. I'm old, forgive me. So Prima, Bennett, Sinatra, etc., make being Italian, especially after World War II, because there's a lot of anti-Italian prejudice during World War II, right? Italy's an enemy, right? the fascist government. But because they're in New York, it's sort of like Arrivederci Roma, hello New York, right? And New York becomes the Italian capital of the United States. And because it's the entertainment center, it also spreads over to the other entertainment center, Los Angeles. So it becomes very, very much, and that's how you become an ethnic group. You know, you become more accepted. Now, I don't know, one of the things, I was at a meeting the other day and people were talking about language in the community, not the Italian community, but in the Polish community. And they said, look, the Italians, they identify more than our kids do. And they don't speak Italian, many of them don't speak Italian, right? But they still identify. Somehow you've kept your identity. You become more and more of a stronger ethnic group. Because being Italian becomes much more, in many ways, acceptable in the United States after World War II, right? You know.
Yeah, well, the Sports Hall of Fame,
And
sports
sports,
history.
absolutely. DiMaggio, Lasorda, I mean, you know.
And we also have to mention, you mentioned World War I.
Right.
When I talk about World War I emphasize the fact that if Italians served, they automatically got citizenship.
Right,
There was
right.
a path to citizenship. So that Americanized them.
Right.
But it was really World War II where we had, if not 1 million Italian Americans serving, almost
Almost 1 million, yeah.
and then they were, say, in the service for 3 years, about 3 years. Well, there was 3 years of Americanization programming. And so they were Americanized by it.
Oh, yeah.
And then when they got out, there was the GI Bill,
Right.
which allowed them to move up into the middle class in big numbers.
Right, right.
And so, and also their service in World War II, even though Italy was the enemy, gave them a little bit more prestige and access to the service clubs, the military service clubs. And so they were Catholic War veterans, American Legion, they were prominent in those on the local level. So they became accepted into the middle class.
I think one of the things about becoming an ethnic group is the military experience. I think it's very important because you live with other people. You know, you live next to Italians, you live next to Poles, you live next to Jews, you live next to hillbillies, right? Sorry, not hillbillies, Southerners. Okay.
Persons.
I'm called, in the Polish community, I'm from the Polish mountains. And so they call me a hillbilly, okay?
Highlander.
A Highlander, yeah. That's the nice way to say it.
Highlander sounds better.
In my neighborhood, they used to call us porch climbers. But anyway, yeah, but that's it. So the military experience is also a very big Americanization experience, both World War I and World War II. But don't forget Korea and Vietnam too. You know, I mean, all these it becomes an Americanization experience. Also intermarriage, right? There's a lot of people that intermarry.
Yeah.
You know, and I think most sociologists would agree that it's the mother who passes on ethnicity often. You know, in many ways. Okay. Next slide. I just want to prove my Italian roots here. Okay. So that's my family up there. I was teaching in Florence one summer. I taught in Florence. I've been to Italy several times. This, however, is very important. This picture of me and my wife with these guys. That was the Italian national soccer team. And they were in a restaurant. And they kind of liked my daughter. So they came over to the table en masse. And we had great fun with them. Because especially since none of us really speak Italian very well, it didn't matter, you know. So they bought us a bottle of wine, and we had a good time. All right. That's nighttime over Lake Michigan. Yeah.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you,
Really
Dominic.
great.
But you're the one who should have given the talk, not me.
Now comes the hard part,
Yeah.
the questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Question time.
At Ellis Island, did you come and get a passport?
No, you had your passport to come in. You had
Oh,
to,
you
but
had
you
it
had to
when
be,
you left it.
you were, they asked you all kinds of questions. One of the questions they were asking, if you came as a single woman, they would really be concerned with you, right? Because you might be something you shouldn't be, right? So they'd say, who are you going to live with? How much money do you have? So when you look at the Ellis Island records, it says, so my grandmother came with $11 that they had saved for her to go make the trip with. and it said she was going to live with her cousin, okay? And they had a guarantee, she had a guarantee then. So it was very different from immigration today, coming in with a passport today, et cetera, et cetera. And, you had to show some sort of wealth because they were worried about you being pauper. So, and also the health thing. And of course, they would also ask you, how many husbands do you have? None. And if you said none, then they were even curious, why are you coming to the United States, right? A lot of people, by the way, the immigrant ports were often difficult things. You land in New York, you don't speak English, and it's 1890, and you're maybe a woman carrying 2 bags. A man comes up, can I help you? These bags are weighing you down. And he said, oh, thank you. And he says, I'll show you to a hotel or train stations. And he takes the 2 bags and he runs off. Or there were all kinds of ways to screw people out of money, or out of their clothing, their baggage, their income. And also the white slave trade. Young women were often brought into the white slave trade when they came into the United States. So there was, sex trafficking at the time as well. Yeah, they were always worried about those kinds of things. Yeah. Yes.
I read your book about Polish Chicago, and I was really impressed.
Oh, thank you.
And I've worked with immigrants now, I guess, going on 30 years. And one of the things that impresses me is, while the Italian community is kind of stabilized, the Polish community I find is a marked contrast, because every year there's a Polish people coming here. By the way, not always with all the proper papers.
Right.
But there's always an interesting contrast that if you're from the wrong place and you don't have the right papers, you're illegal. Otherwise, you're just a summer worker.
Right.
And I always thought it was interesting.
In the 1990s, the Polish community had a great influx of people coming on vacation. So they had a vacation visa. So I had a guy working on my house. As I said, I'm a Polish Highlander, a Polish mountaineer. And so I had a construction company come over to, all guys from my part of Poland, and we talked pretty straightforward with each other. I speak Polish, pidgin Polish. And I said to him, I said, Joe, how long have you been on vacation? He said, 28 years. So there was a lot of this in the 1990s. But you see, now with the EU, so the last time I went to Sicily, I was sitting in a plaza outside of, there's a church and little cafes around the plaza, little town square, and I hear Polish all around me. And I said, so I talked with them, and they were on vacation, okay? They says, it's kind of rainy in Poland right now, it's nice and sunny in Sicily, so we're down here, just like the Brits. And then I'm outside of a Greek ruin in Sicily, and there's a guy picking snails. And so we started talking with him in our bad Italian. And I told him I was a Polacco, and he said 50,000 Poles in Sicily, working on the oil rigs and in construction. And I know in northern Italy, you couldn't get any construction in your house unless there was a Polish, because they dominated the construction industry in the north. We stayed in Umbria for a week or so. And they were all Polish people who were working on the thing. So no, Poles aren't coming in large numbers anymore to the United States. They don't have to. So there were 13 buses every day from Poznań in Poland to Brussels, and probably the same amount of numbers that go to Italy. So they go to work in Belgium. They can go back and see grandma over the weekend.
Yeah, much better.
And they don't have to worry about a visa until just the last administration. You had to have a visa to come from Poland. Even though Poland was part of NATO, an ally of the United States, had thrown off the communist government, you still had to have a visa. And visas are very expensive in Poland. They were like $1,000 a piece. And and they could be taken away from you very quickly. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, I didn't know this, I just found this out. My nephew's in Italy studying for a year.
Yeah.
He went in August and he's gonna come home in May for a school in California, studying architecture in Florence. But he almost didn't get to go because it took him over 6 months to get his student visa. Italy gave him such a hard time. He had to prove that he paid the tuition for the year. He had to prove that he paid for his apartment there. Even though my brother and sister-in-law divorced, they both had to show they had bank accounts. So if he ran out of money there, they would be able to send him money. I don't know if it's just that they don't want people coming and then staying after their visa runs out. But he got his visa like 2 weeks before he was supposed to go. He didn't even think he would be able to go. Because they gave him, he would submit papers and then they'd ask for more stuff. I didn't think getting a visa to Italy was that hard.
Well, it's not if you're just visiting. It's not if you're just a
But
tourist.
he's only gonna be there for not even a year, August to May.
Yeah, that's 6 months, and then you have to have it.
I mean, I didn't think they, you know, like they asked if you have money, if your parents have money,
Yeah.
if you have a bank account. I mean, really? I mean, he's going with a school from California. He went with Cal Poly.
Well, you know, the other way to do it is, I went to Poland to teach for a year in Krakow, and but I had a Fulbright, and Fulbright takes care of all that because they're also paying you, so they, you know, they.
Well, no, exactly, and pay because
Yeah,
he's studying.
right, yeah.
But I just didn't think it would be that hard to get
Yeah, you know,
a student visa to go to Florence.
But you know, if he was a citizen, let's say of Germany or France or not England anymore, Ireland, he could just go to Italy.
Oh,
because
yeah,
there's no-
because he's coming from the United
Yeah,
States.
but he's coming from the United States.
So it's generally 6 months anywhere, probably,
Yeah, it's
right?
probably about 6 months everywhere.
And he's gonna try to get dual citizenship there because, you know,
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good.
they say it's easy. I don't know if that's.
Once he
It's not
gets
that
dual,
easy.
it's not that easy, yeah.
Yeah.
But once he gets dual citizenship, then he can go any country in the.
Because I just filled out a whole bunch of papers for him, because
Yeah.
his mother's Jewish and his father, my brother's Italian, so I put all my grandparents my parents came from Italy and all that, so.
Yeah, I could, for instance, I can't get Polish citizenship. My grandparents came before Poland was independent. So they came in just before World War I. Poland got its independence in 1918. So I was talking to the consulate, he says, oh, we're gonna give you, citizenship. And the woman who does that says, no, we can't, because he has to jump in through all the hoops. And,
My father came in 28.
yeah. But see, Italy was independent. So yeah, he'll be able to get it probably.
Dominic, I want you to give us a preview of your next presentation here. And that is a comparison between Italian immigrants and Polish immigrants to Chicago.
Wow.
Just 4 or 5 points and,
Well, I think, the two immigrations are very similar for reasons for coming, right? Nobody comes to Chicago because of the palm trees and the beautiful beaches. Let's face it, this is not Hawaii. But they come here to work. So I think both groups come for that basic reason. Both groups are primarily peasants, peasants that come. And both groups create community. Community. What is community? So sometimes we use the word neighborhood and community synonymously, right? But it's not, they're not the same. You all don't live in the same block. It's your community, right? Being Italian or being interested in Italy has some sort of connection for you, so you become that. There's the academic communities, right? But neighborhoods are based on very, very, very tight kinds of local situations, especially before 1960, 1970, when they begin to disintegrate. Why did neighborhoods disintegrate after 1960, 1970? The automobile. The automobile. Suddenly you can live anywhere and go meet your friends anywhere else. So the automobile begins to pull neighborhoods apart. Just like the truck begins to decentralize industry too, So these are, sometimes you make changes in a society, you don't know what the end game is going to be, what the end change is going to be, So you put in highways, and by the way, the Italian community was decimated by the Dan Ryan and the Eisenhower Expressway, And the Greek community was almost totally destroyed, the Greek town. There's no Greeks that live in Greek town anymore. There's like a handful of restaurants, but that's it. Where Greek town was a bustling community before the Dan Ryan came in and UIC came in as well. So.
and then Catholicism.
And then
of course.
Catholicism is very important,
But
of course.
the Polish are
And Poles-
better Catholics.
Poles are better Catholics than me. I have to say that. I mean, they're more, at least they're more pious. I gave a talk last Sunday at a Polish church in Mount Prospect. I'm from the south side. Mount Prospect sounds like it's 700 miles away. And I went up there, and this was a church that had been just a suburban white American church. All these Poles moved in, and now there's Polish masses all Sunday, And they took over, and I went there, and this church could probably sit 2,000 people. It was huge. and it was packed, and people were standing in the back. My daughter is getting married next May, thank God, and she's getting married next May, and she picked a church in Lamont. She wanted to get married, and she doesn't like the modern churches. She wants a church with statues and votive candles and like a real Catholic church, as she calls it, you know. So she picked a church in Lamont, which is, and then that being a Polish Highlander church, one of our, you know, they're mostly there. So we, Poles and other East Europeans bless baskets on Holy Saturday.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And then we have for the first meal Sunday, you know, Easter Sunday. And so we always have to bless a basket. And my parish, which is an Irish parish, Beverly's heavily Irish, they bless the baskets. Like 15 people show up. This church, we went to bless the baskets at this church. There were 6 blessings.
Wow.
6 blessings, 3 in Polish, 3 in English. We went to the last English one. There were 800 people.
Oh, wow.
We had to wait in line for like an hour to get our baskets blessed. So, I mean, yeah, there's still, especially in the immigrant and immigrant children community, is still very, now Poland itself is getting less and less Catholic. It's becoming more and more European.
Italy too.
Italy too, yeah, like I said.